Some teachers just really get on my nerves, you know? I don't know what planet they're on, but they definitely are just built different. Here's an example. When you need to go to the toilet, you politely put your hand up and say, "Miss, can I go to the toilet?" "No, you should have gone at lunch." "I'm sorry, Karen, but I can't control my bladder. You know, at lunch, when I'm eating and drinking, it gets digested, and then later on, I need to go to the toilet. It will take me 5 minutes at max. Probably not even 5 minutes. Considering our lessons are like an hour long, I'm sure that's not too much of an issue, is it?" And then sometimes they're just like, "Okay, but you need to wait until so-and-so gets back." I need to go to the toilet. I don't care about talking to anyone. I want to go to the toilet. I don't care about that. What do you think we're going to do in there? Just sit and chat for the rest of the lesson? No. And then they're like, "Don't want you having a bit of a mother's meeting in there." Oh my god. And the scariest thing in school is when they put the I can't even say it, the name on the board. Ah!
Mom, why am I bound and ugly?
It's because when you're 4 you get a hair color.
Okay, well I'm turning for tomorrow.
Yeah, now go to sleep.
They sleep. In the morning.
Girl, you know I want your love.
Funniest 911 calls.
911, what's your emergency?
I think somebody broke into my house in my living room.
Okay, stay where you are. We're going to send someone over right now.
Hang on, I'm investigating.
You do not have to do that.
Oh, it ain't no man, it's a dog, and I hate dogs.
If there's a dog, it could be rabid. Do not approach it.
I'm approaching the rabbit dog now.
Do not approach the dog.
I think it's a labradoodle. Looks like a baby. It's coming up to me now.
Sir, get out of the room.
The dog is in my face. Oh, oh, oh. It's killing me. Oh, this is very nice. And now I like dogs.
So is everything okay?
Oh, yeah, it is very okay. I'm getting killed by a dog. I think I'll name him Gregory.
Okay, great. May I ask, how did the dog enter your house?
Well, I installed the doggy door last week. It's a puppy want to come on in.
Goodbye.
Part 2 about the girl I knew who lived in my neighborhood. So it's late and it's time for me to go home. She said she was scared and starts crying. Then she runs into her bed and flops into her sheets. Her skirt lifted and there were bruises all around her thighs. I ask her, "What happened?" She looks down and quickly pulls her skirt over her bruises. I ask, "Did someone do that to you?" And she says she can't tell me. I ask why. She responds, "If I do, they're going to hurt me." So I ran downstairs to her stepmom and told her what I saw. She sits and laughs in my face. I was so confused and asked her, "Are you gonna help her?" And she tells me that little hoe can help herself and that I actually should be going home. So I went into the living room where her uncles were and told them. One of them had said, "That's why that girl don't need to be bringing random folks into the house," and runs upstairs to her room. One of the other uncles asks, "You want to get popped?" I shook my head in fear and said no. And he yells at me, telling me to go home. From there, I ran home and never came back. And after that day, she never came back outside. It's been 7 years. To this day, I wonder what happened to her. When I was younger, there was a girl I knew who lived in our neighborhood. None of the kids liked her because they claimed that she stinked and acted weird. When they talked about her, I kind of felt bad. So I became friends with her. Yeah, of course, I got the, "Why do you hang out with her?" But she really wasn't all that bad. But her scent, they were kind of right about that. One day, she invites me over to her house, and she was very excited because she told me I was the first person to ever come over. And I felt so honored, so I went. But when I went into her house, it smelled very bad, almost nauseating, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be rude. She had a lot of uncles that lived with her family. Honestly, it was like 4 to 5 families in one house, to be honest. But she first introduced me to her stepmom. I said hi to her, but she just stared at me in disgust. Then we went to her room to play. As it got later, I told her I needed to go home. But she begged me to stay longer because she was scared. I told her I'd come tomorrow, and she just starts crying. She runs into her bed and falls into her sheets, which lifted her skirt. There were bruises all over her thighs. Let me know if y'all want a part 2.
When I was little, I found my mom's credit card. And, being a 6-year-old, I saw my mom putting the credit card on her phone, and I knew how she did it. So, I decided that I was going to put it on my phone. So, I put it on my phone, and I was downloading Roblox because I thought, hey, I can play with my friends here. That day, I spent $2,000 worth of freaking money on Robux. let's just say, a lot of my friends thought I was really cool and rich. When my mom found out, I hid from her for seriously like a day, and then once I got in there, she wasn't mad. She just said I was Captain Robux.
Part 2 of how I was sexually harassed twice while working at Walmart.
Something I forgot to mention in the first part, I reported Terry several times and they still did nothing about it.
So like I said, then I met this kid Jordan, him and I started getting close, and work actually started to become fun.
Well, finally, after a month, we decided that we were going to go out to lunch during work. So the day that we went out to lunch, he kept telling me that he needed to tell me something.
But he was like beating around the bush the whole time. Like for some reason, he just couldn't get out what he wanted to tell me. But then he kept trying to change the subject like he wasn't the one who brought it up in the first place. I should have took that as a red flag before we went to lunch, but I didn't. So he keeps going on about it in the car, right? And then he's like, I'm not really 20, I'm 25 turning 26. So then for some reason after that, whenever he saw my mood change, this guy has the audacity to start touching my legs, fucking rubbing my inner thigh and shit. I kept telling him to stop. I was like, what the fuck are you doing? So then I told him I'm getting out of the car. And he says, I'm not gonna let you like for part 3. Part 3 of how I got sexually harassed twice while working at Walmart. So like I said, he wouldn't let me out of the car, but then we got back to work. And then he had the audacity to keep asking if I was okay when he literally just sexually harassed me in the car. So I went to the bathroom, literally had a whole fucking mental breakdown. I called my mom to come get me because I was not finna stay there. So the next time that I went back to work, I grabbed my stuff and I gave it to one of the workers to go and give to a manager and tell them that I was quitting. Well, one of the managers caught me walking out the back door and she was like, what's wrong? So I immediately broke down. I started telling her what was going on. And then a crowd of people came around us being nosy as fuck, listening to what I was saying. And she was like, you're not quitting. I'm gonna take care of this. So she sent me home and she said that she would call me whenever it was taken care of. So 2 days goes past. I'm like, why the fuck hasn't she called? So then I call and I found out that she fired me. So I reported everything to Walmart ethic team and they just closed my case. They basically didn't do shit about it.
Oh, and Jordan wasn't really a manager. He was a supervisor.
Should I try to take this to court? Story time. My boyfriend found out that his best friend got me pregnant. It was my junior year in high school and my boyfriend and I had been dating for 4 months. Well, the one night him, his friend, and I were all supposed to go to this party. My boyfriend ended up getting called into work that night, so his friend and I went. Which my boyfriend was fine with because he wanted his best friend to keep an eye on me, but he also trusted us. Anyway, so his friend and I ended up going to the party and then but the next morning I woke up, I didn't remember that at all. So fast forward, I find out that I'm pregnant. Well, me forgetting that I totally cheated on my boyfriend, I thought that it was his. Well, a week later, I get a text from his friend. He's like, oh my god, what are we gonna do? And I'm like, what do you mean, what are we gonna do? So then he filled me in on the whole situation that I didn't remember. But I was like, there's really no chance of this because my boyfriend and I fucked like a million times and me and you fucked once. The real tea is that my boyfriend was black and his friend was white. Well, me being the ass bitch that I am, I was like, well, let's just wait it out. I bet it's not his. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my boyfriend found out that his best friend got me pregnant. So like I said, my boyfriend was black, his best friend was white. And because I doubted that it was his best friend's kid, I decided to wait it out. Say it with me, bad idea. So fast forward, I'm in the delivery room and I decide not to have my boyfriend in there. Well, let's just say good thing that he did. Bitch, whenever this thing popped out, it was white as fucking paper. So I was like to the doctor, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna have a panic attack. Please get the baby out of the room. I don't want anybody around the baby right now. So when my boyfriend came back in the room, I was like, oh, we can't see the baby. He's having some issues. He's over here freaking out. I'm having a fucking panic attack about what I'm gonna do. And they brought my kid back and I was like, that's not my kid. And this girl looked so confused. She was like, oh, okay. And my boyfriend and I are laughing. We're like, oh, haha, that's funny. Then she comes back into the room and she's like, ma'am, this is your kid. So my boyfriend started screaming and he broke up with me after that. Like, how rude to just leave me with a kid by myself. No, I'm just joking. I know that was pretty fucked. Story time about one of the most embarrassing things that has ever happened to me in high school. So a little background information. I was in my freshman year of high school. Well, spring break was coming up. Well, the whole year, my friend and I hadn't been to one single party. So we decided that we wanted to try and go to a party every single day of spring break. Which was about to be super difficult because we had to worry about my strict-ass parents and my neighbors. A little background info on my neighbor. My neighbor is this girl who's in my same grade and she literally hates my guts. I don't know why, but literally anything that I do, she'll go and she'll tell her mom and then her mom will tell my mom. Because my mom and her mom are best friends. But before we know it, Saturday comes around. And we go back to school on Monday. We did not make it to one single party.
Well, later that night, we found out that one of our friends was throwing one. So around 11 o'clock, everybody's sleeping, and I walk out my back door, hop over my fence, and I start heading towards the road where my friend was going to be parked. You know, who do I see fucking sitting outside on their porch reading a fucking book? My fucking neighbor. Like for part 2. Storytime about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So a little background information. This all happened whenever I was in 6th grade. This all happened on a Tuesday night. So I had school the next day. Well, my dad had went to work earlier in the day. Well, around 10 o'clock at night, we hadn't heard from my dad all day, which was super weird for him because he was always home around 10 o'clock. And even if he wasn't, he still would have kept in contact with us and let us know where he was at. So at this point, my family and I were really scared, and we're thinking that something happened to him. I was calling and texting him, my mom was calling and texting him. My whole family was pretty much trying to get a hold of him. Like, we had called all the hospitals to see if he was there. We called police stations to see if he might have been in jail, or if they had his last name in the system. So nobody had heard or seen from him. So we all went to sleep that night hoping that he would show up in the morning. So the next day after I got home from school, my mom came home from work and she had told me about this phone call that she got. Like for part 2. Part 2 of how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my mom had gotten home from work and she told me about this phone call that she got while she was at work. So apparently one of her coworkers called her and said, "Hey, I think I saw your husband on the news." So after that, she showed me the news article and I couldn't even believe what I was reading. So I guess my dad had been drinking and he went to an auto repair shop and stole a car because I guess the keys were left in the door of the car. And what makes this even worse, the car that he stole had 2 guns in the trunk. And they weren't 2 pistols, these were 2 big ass guns that were fucking loaded. Oh wait, I forgot something. So before this, he had been at the strip club. And somehow he ended up in pink lingerie. Guys, I cannot make this shit up. So he was driving around and he decided to park right in the middle of an intersection. And it was literally causing a whole fucking scene. There were people with their kids worried as hell. So after that, a few people called the cops, like for part 3. Part 2 about how my dad was on the news and now everybody knows my last name. So like I said, my dad parked in the middle of an intersection and people were calling the cops. So when the police arrived, my dad was half passed out in the car. This happened in like the middle of broad day, like there's traffic everywhere. So when they finally get up to the car, my dad is literally slumped in the driver's seat. There was a bottle of whiskey in the door and it was completely empty. When they went to arrest him, he started resisting. He was screaming a bunch of profanities at them and started kicking them, threatening them with guns, which made the situation worse because my dad had no clue that there were any guns in the back of the car. So that just made the police think that they were his. So they take my dad to jail and he has like 7 charges against him. But we were happy because we knew where he was. Well, the worst part is, so the next day when I went to school, people were coming up to me asking if that was my dad on the news. Some people were even making fun of me because of what he did. And that's really fucking embarrassing for a 12-year-old. But it's okay, Dad, I still love you. Storytime about how I crashed my dad's really expensive car. So a little background information. My mom had just got remarried to my stepdad 3 years ago, and he was this rich asshole who owned a bunch of food trucks and thought he was the shit. Well, at the time I also had a boyfriend. And we had only been dating for like a month and a half. My boyfriend would always beg me to let him drive my stepdad's car. And I always said no because that was like his child. Like he had children. He could care less about them. His car was more important. Anyway, so the one weekend my parents are out of town and one of my friends was throwing a graduation party. So that whole day my boyfriend was trying to talk me into taking the car. And I already knew where my stepdad hid the keys. So I just decided I wouldn't drink that night and I would just take the car. He kept asking me if he could drive, but clearly I said no. Because this kid literally told me that he crashed the first 2 cars that he had. So we get to the party, we're having a good time, and one of my friends tells me that everybody's taking pictures with my car outside. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how I crashed my dad's very expensive car. So like I said, everybody's taking pictures of the car, but I decided to let it go at first. I mean, there was one point where I went outside just so that way I could kind of let everybody know, hey, you're taking pictures with my car. Well, half an hour later, my boyfriend and I decided to leave, and he's obliterated. Like, we probably got 50 feet from her house, and then I had to stop the car so that way he could get out and throw up in somebody's yard. Anyway, so he gets in the car, we're on the way back to my house. And my house was like a 20-minute drive away. Well, we were 5 minutes from my house. At this one intersection, I get a green light and I go to make a right, and I accidentally hit a car turning out of the bar parking lot. So I'm literally freaking the fuck out. and my boyfriend's in the seat next to me crying for some reason. So the guy in the other car calls the cops. The cops show up, they call my stepdad and my mom. My boyfriend went to the hospital, he had alcohol poisoning. Well, my boyfriend told his mom that it was all my fault and I'm grounded for 6 months. Story time about how my neighbor killed my dog. So a little background information. When I was about 3 years old, my parents got me a German Shepherd. And my neighbors who lived next to us absolutely loved our dog. And so did their kids. Like, their dad literally put a doggy door in the fence, so that way our dog could go back and forth from our house to his house. Well, when I was about 8 years old, my neighbors decided to sell their house. So he told us that he had to take out the doggy door because the people that were buying his house hated animals. Well, the people who had just bought his house, they ended up moving in before he could take out the doggy door. So our new neighbors asked us if we could put like a piece of plywood in front of the door so that way our dog couldn't get through. And they said that they would do the same to their side of the fence. So my dad said, yeah, he put a piece of plywood in front of there. Well, my dog, Gabe, the one night that my brother let him out, he ended up getting the plywood off of the doggy door. Well, my brother literally had to crawl through the doggy door to get the dog before one of them saw him in the yard. Like part 2 about how my neighbors killed my dog. So like I said, my brother let the dog out and my dog got the piece of plywood off of the door. And my brother had to crawl through the doggy door to get my dog out of our neighbor's yard. So that way our neighbors wouldn't wake up and know that he got through. But whenever my brother went to go get Gabe, he realized that my neighbors didn't even have a piece of plywood on their side of the fence or anything. So my brother told my dad, and my dad went over there the next day to talk to them. And he pretty much said, I'm not going to have a piece of fucking plywood on my side of the fence if you're not going to be doing anything on yours to prevent my dog from going into your yard. And they were like, oh, well, your old neighbors never took out the doggy door. And my dad was like, that's not our fucking fault. Well, then our new neighbors said, if your dog all of a sudden becomes sick or just does not come back, don't be surprised. My dad decided to replace the door himself. Well, once Gabe realized that the doggy door was gone, when we would let him outside, he would literally just sit there and bark at the fence. Well, 2 weeks later, Gabe ended up passing away, and we found out it's because our neighbors were giving him rat poison.
Story time of why it's never good to be in a best friend group of 3. So a little background information. I was in 4th grade and I was 9 years old, about to turn 10. Now I know you're thinking, that's really young. Well, sis, I was just smart enough to see the red flags early on, unlike half of you who probably didn't see them. Anyway, so I had 2 friends we're going to call the one Becky and the one Mia. Now let me tell you a little bit about Becky. Becky was kind of a bitch. Now anytime that she saw Mia and I having our own conversation, she would pretty much bully us. And she would have 2 of her other friends tag along and do it also, Brooklyn and Riley. So the one day we're walking to PE and Mia and I are having a conversation. And in our gym class, you had to line up in groups of 3. So it would go Mia, Becky, and then me. Well, because I wanted to finish my conversation with Mia, I decided to sit in Becky's spot. So we're sitting down and then Becky marches over to where we're sitting and just stands there and stares at us. Then she walks away and goes and sits with her other friends. And at the end of gym class, she comes back over to us. Like for part 2. Part 2 about why it's never good to be in a best friend group of 3. So like I said, Brittany hated it whenever Mia and I would have our own conversation. And I sat in Becky's spot in gym class. And then she got mad at us because I wanted to finish my conversation with Mia. So she goes over with her other friends that literally bully Mia and I. So at the end of gym class, she walks up to both of us with Brooklyn. And she literally is just standing there. And then Brooklyn goes, do you need me to do it for you? Me and I look at each other like, what the fuck is going on? And then Brittany's like, no, I just wanted to tell you guys that I don't want to be friends with you anymore. She was like, you guys are just so fake. Like, you never include me in anything. Which was completely not true, but we were like, whatever. So then the next day at school, Brittany comes up to Mia and I, and she's like, hey guys. Like, this bitch was bipolar as fuck. And we're like, we thought you didn't want to be friends with us anymore. And she was like, no, I just meant I didn't want to be best friends. Story time about how my ex-boyfriend accused me of cheating on an all-girls trip. So a little background information, I was 14 or 15 around the time, and it was the summer of my freshman year. So within the last few weeks of my 8th grade year, one of the more popular boys asked me out, and we're gonna call him Carson. I wasn't like super popular at the school, but I was like a medium maybe. But I was raised in a super strict household, where the only phone that I pretty much had was one that was able to call 911 and my parents. And I especially was not allowed to be talking to boys. So Carson had the great idea of giving me his old phone, and throughout the summer, I would text him on there. Well, I started to realize him getting really toxic. Anytime that he would see my Snapchat location change, he would be like, where are you going? Why didn't you tell me you were going here?
So I started distancing myself a little bit from him. Also because our relationship was just moving way too fast. Within the first month of us dating, he was talking about wanting to marry me. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my ex-boyfriend accused me of cheating on him on an all-girls trip. So like I said, I started distancing myself from him because he became too attached and was just way too toxic. Well, I was also in a lot of clubs in school, and a few of them would require me to go on trips. Well, the one that I went on was an all-girls trip, and before I left, I texted Carson letting him know that I wouldn't have my phone all week. Well, on the last night of my trip, there was a girls and boys dance. There was like a group of boys from a different school that we were meeting up with, and I tried staying back at the cabin, but they wouldn't let me. So we started doing dances that required partners, so I was pretty much forced to dance with one of the boys. Well, when I came back home, I got 100 texts from Carson calling me a bunch of nasty names, and you can probably guess them. And somebody got a picture of me dancing with one of the boys, and Carson sent it to me and said, "We're done." So after that, I just ignored him. And then literally that night at 1 a.m., he was texting me saying, "I miss you, please come back to me," like for part 3. Part 3 about how my ex-boyfriend accused me of cheating on him on an all-girls trip. So like I said, I received over 100 messages from him. He got a picture of me dancing with one of the boys and said, "We're done." And then at 1 in the morning, he's like, "I miss you so much. Please don't leave me. Like, I've been doing so bad while you were gone." So of course I didn't accept his apology and I just blocked him on all my social media. And the next day I wake up to messages on my Instagram, my Snapchat, my Facebook. Like, who even uses that? Unless you're talking to family. Well, then Carson decides to tell everybody at my school about how I'm a lying, cheating scumbag. And now, 3 years later, no good guy from my school wants to date me. So now whenever I'm talking to a guy, I have to make sure that they're not affiliated with Carson in any way. But low-key, I had a really good glow-up, so all the hot boys want to talk to me now. And Carson's pretty much still a scumbag.
Time about how I stole my best friend's boyfriend. So a little background information, I was 14 and in 8th grade. And we're gonna call my best friend Ashley. Ashley was really nice at first. She always had my back when I needed her. But then out of nowhere, she started being super rude to me. She turned into one of those pick-me girls that would always make fun of you in front of other guys, talk crap about you to the guy that you liked. Well, the one day I hear her talking shit about me whenever we were in class. And everybody could hear her. She was literally on the whole other side of the class. And I asked her, "Hey, like, why were you talking about me?" She was like, "No, I was talking about a different girl." And I had a pretty unique name, so I was like, who else in the school could you have been talking about? But I just brushed it off. Well, then we were in algebra class and I heard her talking shit about me again. How I do my makeup so bad and I could never get a boyfriend, like I'm so ugly and all that stuff. Well, she thought that I wasn't mad at her, so she came up to me the one day and was like, "OMG, I have a boyfriend." Like for part 2.